Greetings and welcome to this edition of Faith to Live By. I'm Pam Christian, your researcher, writer, producer, and host of this weekly podcast where I help us explore current events from a biblical and prophetic perspective so we, as God's people, know how He wants us to respond. It was most unexpected that Barry Wunsch, a well-respected prophet of God known as the Canadian Hammer, would be available for my podcast in the weeks leading up to the Canadian election. For us to learn from him the true condition of Canada at a time when censorship is at an all-time high for the citizens of Canada, to even have the ability to know what their leadership is openly working toward, is nothing short of God's divine intervention. Even more to my surprise is that Grant Abraham, the leader of the United Party of Canada, is my guest this week and next week. Truly, God uses the simple things such as this podcast to confound the wise. What you are about to hear from Grant Abraham can only be explained as divine intervention, with God wanting His beloved people of Canada and those from other nations whose leadership is bent on globalism to become fortified with the truth. I will emphatically say up front, these podcasts concerning the nation of Canada are among the most important I've done for the sake of all the people of the free world. As I've come to know and have faithfully been bringing you, it is not God's plan for the globalist to have control. So God is equipping us with truth so we can partner with Him to see His kingdom will done on earth as it is in heaven. By all means, share this podcast far and wide to call people into action in these critical days. We must do all we can through prayer and practical means to stop evil from advancing. As you know, evil is advanced in part through the use of mainstream media worldwide. The aim is to prevent people from knowing the truth and having any ability to protect their personal freedoms. However, God has positioned key people in places of governance and leadership to promote His righteous plans. Whatever mainstream media and politicians are screaming the loudest about should provide us ample proof that we are hitting them where it hurts. In the United States, God has inspired unprecedented speed in exposing fraud and corruption as a means of freeing His people worldwide. Between the Doge exposures and the implementation of reciprocal tariffs, the globalists know their honeypots, money laundering, bank and drug cartels, human trafficking, and endless wars they have used to amass wealth and control are being stripped from them, forcing them out of power. Considering all of this, I want to set the stage for Grant Abraham and what God is doing in Canada by bringing your attention to the prophetic word God spoke through Dr. Patricia Green on April 4th, 2025, which she prayed into and posted on April 9th, 2025. The opening statement from the Lord was, quote, "Tell the people that these tariffs are a good thing to balance the trade between nations. Although the world is screaming about them, they will negotiate trade agreements with the United States of America that will benefit the nations willing to come to the table. Those nations who refuse to negotiate will not fare well, says the Lord. My servant and son, Donald J. Trump, is a negotiator. He wants what is fair for the United States of America. The world sees him as a tyrant, but not all the world. I have given President Donald J. Trump strategies and keys to bring about my plans for the United States of America. As I have said before, as the United States goes, so go the nations. Donald Trump is about to break the backbone of the global elite, and their fraudulent system of money is being exposed and will be brought down, says the Lord." You'll want to hear the entire post, especially the end part about healing as well, so use the link in the show notes. Please keep the prophetic promises in mind and pray over them and the people involved in acting on God's promises for them to be safe and effective in what God has called them to do. President Trump and Grant Abraham are among those we must pray for. Now, because I want to give as much time as possible to my guest, I will dispense with any lengthy introduction and my usual announcements, and instead, I ask you to use the link in the show notes to learn of Grant's background and how he came to be in the position to help restore Canada. Please give your undivided attention to all Grant has to say. Here's part one of my time with Grant Abraham. Grant Abraham, I'm so honored that you've taken the time to be with me today. This is such an important issue. It has world impact, what's going on in Canada, and you are in the thrust of your United Party of Canada's efforts to try to save Canada. So again, for you to take the time today to be with me is truly an honor, and I thank you.
Well, Pamela, good morning to you. It's great to be here with you for this recording. It is an important conversation, not just for Canada, but also for the free peoples of the world to understand what the next sinister plan is that is actually designed to frustrate human freedom and well-being and thriving. And it is truly a discussion about light and darkness.
It absolutely is. And I think that there are a lot of people in the world today that are still not understanding that this is very, very real. Yes, they may understand there's a spiritual battle between good and evil, but I don't know that they understand how far advanced it really is in many of the nations of the world under this effort headed up under the World Economic Forum, known as the One World Government or the New World Order. And Canada, unfortunately, has been the nation that has gone furthest along to become one of the, in fact, you said to me earlier, Justin Trudeau in 2018 announced that he planned on Canada becoming the first post-nation state under this new world order. I want you to address this so that people understand how real this is, especially coming from you, again, the leader of the United Party of Canada, one who is really trying to combat what's been going on in Canada for quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely. So this conversation, really, this discussion globally, I think we saw let's say, the breaking of the mold and the exposure to these issues back in 2016, when two things happened in the world that kind of rattled the dark plan, if you will, internationally. Because I think what people really need to understand is that we have tended to think since World War II that there's kind of just politics at work in the different countries of the world, etc. But really, what is much deeper is what I call there's a human membrane of darkness and evil that has been highly structured and organized for a long time to basically bring people into a control and away from democracy, away from the principles that many of the best Western countries have been set up with. And many of those countries are like, the United States and Canada and the UK, Australia, New Zealand, etc., have been set up at the core with Judeo-Christian values at their center, and it's allowed for a system of the rule of law to exist, and a value of life, the individual life, the identity of the individual being valuable because they're created in the image of God, and therefore life has value from conception to death. And these are principles that we've had embedded in our nations. And there's been a movement in the last, I don't know, probably since World War II, to develop this concept of a post-nation state or an organization of government or governance, to be more precise, that is above the electoral interests of each country's, representative government, almost like a world government. So that's been talked about for a long time. We've heard terms like the New World Order. We've heard terms like the cabal. We've heard terms in the US recently about the deep state. And I think that all of this discussion really has crashed now back onto the scene in terms of people's awareness with 2016, because two things happened. President Trump got elected the first time, which started to, which changed the narrative in the world, actually, in relation to people understanding that there, this concept of fake news, and that there's suddenly this difference between what was being told and what was really going on. Not that we would have been critical of the press, I guess, in my lifetime, but this notion of just stuff being completely wrong and devious and propaganda. And then, President Trump started to talk about the deep state, and he could see that there was a mechanism embedded within the US government that was actually working against the interests of the elected officials. And in some ways, he learned a lot from my observation in that first term, because he's doing things very different in his second term, right? And the other criteria that really revealed what was going on in the first circumstance, or in the other country that showed the world what was happening, was the discussion around Brexit. And Brexit happened in 2016, really led initially conceptually by Nigel Farage, and they basically, that was the British people saying, we're fed up with the European Union. The European Union started out as a good economic idea, but it became something more. It became almost a monster that where people were being moved into this new culture of post-nationalism. So you stopped being British and you started to become European. And it was maybe felt that way, but as it evolved and the knowledge of those things evolved, people would have discussed what Brexit meant as the reality of losing culture, values, and traditions of the nation. And that's why it was a real blow in 2016 when Britain actually voted to leave this whole concept of, not just a group of countries connected together in Europe economically, but a concept where it was melting the national identities away and creating a regional identity or a post-national identity in Europe. And so this language, I suppose, for me, was something because I was working overseas and I did quite a bit of graduate study on this topic. When I heard Justin Trudeau say in 2018 that Canada would be the first post-nation state, it really, really freaked me out because I knew exactly what that meant. It meant moving the people and their rights and their identity away from the safety of a benevolent and protective government towards a government that was going to do something else. And it wasn't necessarily for the people's interests. And part of the discussion there is really an identity issue, because rather than we the people, that conglomeration of individual people and their rights and identity and inalienable rights, the language of post-nationalism is the collective interest, which kind of becomes this amorphous concept where life doesn't really matter because it's what's good for this elusive notion of the common good, not anybody's one individual right. And it becomes very difficult to have conversations about truth or justice in those situations because you're never talking about one person's context. And this is part of what the post-nationalism discussion is about. So, just as a Canadian, hearing that, I was deeply troubled. And I would ask my friends in Canada about it, and it never seemed to register with them that there was actually an issue with it, or the term just wasn't understood. And then shortly after that, when COVID hit, it went the opening up of the intention of the Canadian government, the Liberal government led by Justin Trudeau at that time. That intention was further clarified, where they said that COVID has provided us with an opportunity for a reset. And I was really frustrated with Canadians because, and particularly the opposition party, which is the Conservative Party of Canada, whom I was a member of, because they weren't asking what does that mean? What does post-nationalism mean? We had 3 leadership races inside the Conservative Party. We had 2 general elections in the country while this was all shaping and being disclosed by the Liberals. But the Conservative Party never even asked the question to say, hey, what's a post-national state? What do you mean you're resetting the country? Resetting it to what? Why would you change it? We've never agreed to the relationship between our government changing. You're only a minority government in this country. Why are you talking about changing the DNA of the country specifically? And so I was asking these questions, and I was actually quite, let's say, concerned, deeply concerned, and actually getting kind of agitated about why these things were shaping, but why the party that I was a part of wasn't asking the question. And so for me, then I had a very interesting experience because in late 2020, I went to a meeting out in British Columbia where there were some people having a meeting for a by-election, and one of my friends was running in that by-election. And the lady that introduced her got up at this particular meeting in the BC, in British Columbia, the lower Fraser Valley of British Columbia. And they started talking about being a part of a group of 52 civil servants that were federal, provincial, local, municipal, and also Indigenous or Aboriginal from right across the country. And they were being brought together to work on a rethinking of what Canada looked like, basically. And their real mandate was to work through 5 different sectors of society: education, health, family, justice, and water, actually, I think were the 5 were, if I remember correctly. And what they were doing was they were basically taking Agenda 2030 and figuring out how to install it into the various levels of legislation, municipal, school board, provincial, health, whatever, across all the different levels of government, so that they could rewire Canada, even, let's say, deconstruct it and rebuild it again in the image of this post-national agenda. And so she told me, she didn't say all of that in the first meeting, but she told me enough to kind of quicken, if you will, or to illuminate for me that there was something troubling in the explanation of what was happening at this committee meeting that they were going to. And just as a little bit of background, I write about this in detail in my book, In the Battle for the Soul of Canada, Firing the Forge. And I break down and kind of walk people through how, let's just use the word creepy, the thinking was that actually was being done to unravel, to deconstruct is the best way that I can say for the system. And so I went back to the lady the next night. They were doing another meeting, and I went back to her afterwards and I talked to her, and I basically said, did I hear you right? Is this what I'm hearing? She said, yeah, I didn't tell that much. How did you know that? And I got the name of the organization that they were meeting through. They were meeting through a not-for-profit organization in British Columbia that was virtually exclusively funded by the government to do this work. And that's our federal government. So they're using taxpayers' money to put into a not-for-profit organization in British Columbia. And they were bringing all these paid salary people to these meetings once a month. And they were very kind of secret. They weren't allowed to necessarily take the documents out. And it was a bit like having a working committee of government or Congress, but it was off the radar and it was outside any kind of parliamentary scrutiny. And so I did a little bit more work on that, and then went back to the lady and I said to her, do you realize that if in 10 years, if someone looks at the work that you're doing here, they look back and they say, what you're really doing was rewiring or unraveling the framework of our nation? and that it was, as it's very counterproductive to the health of the nation, and it's actually similar to as if Canada were being attacked by foreign troops. It's kind of an intellectual parasite loaded into the nervous system of the nation. And that really rattled her. And she said, "No, I haven't thought of that, but you're right. That's exactly what that is." And so what I did was I asked her if she would smuggle out some of the paperwork that she was working on inside these meetings where they would go to once a month and do all this work. So basically, she did that, and when she gave me the documents that she smuggled out, I sat down because I was so shocked at what I was reading. And it was straight out of Agenda 2030, and you can pull up Agenda 2030. You can go onto UN websites or the World Economic Forum, and you can read it. And it's one of these scenarios where if you read the language, it sounds really good, but when you actually process through what the words are saying, they're talking about redefining things like property and wealth and ownership and energy and who owns it and what rights we have to use these things, even access to water and it's actually a radical change to our understanding of free market, of individual property, and the concept that we have of building wealth so that we can be self-sufficient and resilient and leave money to our kids and our grandchildren. This was all on the table being unraveled in these conversations. So I sat down and wrote a thought paper, basically on what I read out of these 10 or 12 pages that this lady had smuggled out of the meeting. If you read my book, it's in Appendix A, this thought paper that I wrote. And that thought paper traveled around the country and ended up with the equivalent of the Canadian FBI and some of the individuals that were on a security committee in the Canadian government. And, to make maybe just for the sake of time, I'll just say this: the government officials, their perspective was, we knew that this was going on in Canada, but we didn't know how well formed it was intellectually. But they said basically it's just not politically pragmatic for us to be able to deal with it. We don't know what to do with it. And then the second one was our Canadian FBI. We call it the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which does our national security in Canada. Their attitude was simply, nowadays there's so much foreign interference in Canada that we can't do anything other than just call this a philosophical paper, even though what I was writing about and interpreting from what I was reading from these notes was actually redefining the social contract of how the nation worked and functioned. It was like in a US context, it's like people are sitting secretly trying to write ways and plans to frustrate the US Constitution and put the American people into bondage. In some ways, in a way, that actually is what was happening. And that's being revealed now. But Canada being called the first post-nation state is probably a very apt description, because we're a massive country with relatively small population, only just 40 million people. And we have massive wealth and resources in this nation in terms of gas and oil and minerals and lumber and water and probably untapped resources we're not even aware of, because we have so much land that has been undeveloped or untouched. So for all the, let's say, other nations in the world that their soil has been used up or has been degraded and they have too many people, or they need energy to feed their economies, Canada's a very ripe target, because in so many ways the nation has been sleeping. It's been a backwater in some ways of the world. almost irrelevant, and yet now we possess a lot of what it is the world needs. So, you know, let's say there's an intent and interest there because there's value. But the deeper issue really is this threat to what Canada was designed to be. And, as a Christian, I would say that our national motto is based on Psalm 72:8, which is, He shall have dominion from sea to sea. And our motto in Canada is from sea to sea, because it is based on Psalm 72:8. So Canada has been established with Judeo-Christian values and principles in the nation, and with a people that continue to be a majority of the nation that still understand that God is sovereign and has a purpose and plans in the world, and that Canada is a part of it. So, that's not a normal political conversation, but it is God that sets the nations in place, and this is a conversation about the intention to destroy nations. And I'd have to look at the passage. I found it recently. There's a passage where it talks about the intentions of the Assyrians in relation to taking the assets of nations and breaking the nations up. I can't remember where it is, but it's in that sense, this is a very old war that's going on. And in some ways, now in Canada, what we're doing with the United Party of Canada is actually confronting this geopolitical agenda to strip Canada of its identity, its culture, its values and traditions, and almost make its people feudal, kind of feudal dependence.
I so appreciate everything you've just explained, and I am hopeful that my audience is listening to this and considering what is going on in their own nations, because Justin Trudeau was very much a puppet of the World Economic Forum. Mark Carney, who is trying to come in and take the place of Trudeau, is very sold out to the World Economic Forum and what's going on for a one world government. And they're not about to easily give up the progress that they've already made in Canada. And you, Grant, are really at the forefront of trying to stop this momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think this is where America is such an important part of this discussion for Canada, too, because, when I look at the words of President Trump, he's saying to Canadians now, we want, well, I think what he has specifically said is, you need to sort out your fentanyl problems and human trafficking in Canada, and tighten up your border. I think what he's really saying is, you guys are bad neighbors. You've got organized crime that has left a bunch of rubbish and garbage in your backyard, and you've got a terrible fence. You need to fix it. And our government, the two parties, the Liberal Party, Mark Carney now leads that, and we're in a national election at the minute. And the leader of the opposition, Mr. Pierre Poilievre, have both come out and said that we need to enter into a retaliatory tariff war with the United States. And that's a very interesting response, because really what President Trump is really saying is, fix those problems, and it's not just 10 kilos of fentanyl moving across the border at night. We're talking about industrial scale production being shipped through Vancouver and money laundered through Vancouver and Toronto globally. And our government, both of the main parties, are both saying, let's have tariffs. And I'm saying to the Canadian people, we have a value problem here, because we're getting sucked into looking at, President Trump as being the bad guy from our media. That's how they're being portrayed. And yet what President Trump is doing is saying, be a better neighbor. You've got organized crime running these things, and you need to fix it. And we're missing the value conversation, saying, why wouldn't we want to fix those things? The interesting thing is that there's a lot of Canadians that also see that. And there's a moving away. You'll be familiar in the United States with the concept of Republican in name only. And in Canada, it's very similar. We have conservatives in name only, that are within the Conservative Party of Canada. And it's interesting, because many of the Christians And the church infrastructure in Canada is still historically, culturally embedded within the Conservative Party, even though the Conservative Party has left the value systems that you would have thought the Christians in a nation would have aligned with. And I kind of, when I'm speaking to people or crowds in Canada here, I'll say a lot of the Christians, it's almost like they have Stockholm syndrome because they're in love with the people that are betraying them. They get as I say, a cuddle and a kiss before an election, and then they continue to go and vote, even though the Conservative Party is facilitating decisions that are undermining the integrity of parental authority, and they're making bad decisions economically about how to relate to the Americans or how to deal with organized crime, etc. And so there's some deep compromises that are allowing those anomalistic decisions to be made that don't represent the people, and the people aren't necessarily seeing those. So I spent a lot of time talking about how do you, I mean, sometimes I'll say to Christians, you're praying for righteousness in Canada, yet you're voting for a party that's going in the opposite direction. There's a dissonance there. There's a dichotomy. Do you see it? And so around the world, this is a good reflection point for around the world, because it really becomes a discussion, and it's a necessary discussion where we need to be talking about values and how those values actually manifest within policy. Because if you start to get policy values that are incongruent, then you allow doors to be open to the kind of thinking that has crept in with Agenda 2030. And so, just as a really live example, and this is particularly relevant for Canada, but it's relevant for your listeners too. Canada has passed a bill called Bill C4. It was passed 1st of December 2021, but that bill basically criminalizes parents if they stop their children going trans and moving towards irreversible surgery that will remove their genitalia. Yeah. And that is, maybe that's a bit graphic for this discussion, but that's the reality of it. And the shocking thing for a lot of people in Canada, whether they value children, or the fact that we should be protecting children, or they're God-fearers, or whether they're, any religion that wants to protect kids, or Christians in this case, they're shocked to learn that bill was unanimously approved and passed by the Conservative Party of Canada, because they failed to provide any opposition to it. And when it came to a vote, if one of those Conservative MPs had put their hand up to stop it, the way that bill was positioned in Parliament, it was called the unanimous consent motion, and it basically reversed the voting, and it meant that it was basically going through on a fast track basis, requiring everyone to consent to it and moving quickly through the House. And if one of those Conservative MPs had actually opposed it, it would have stopped it, and no one opposed it. So now we have a position in Canada where we have this Conservative Party that's linked to a lot of the conservative Christian thinking in the nation, who basically have put a criminal offense in between a parent's duty and love and desire to see their children not be harmed, and with a child making a bad decision. Like, we stop our kids from burning their hands on the fridge. We don't let them drive before they're allowed. We don't let them, do stupid things. We constantly infusing wisdom into their social relationships. But we have a government situation now in Canada where we've passed a bill that puts parents in jail, or grandparents, for 5 years if you stop them moving to irreversible surgery. And it's shocking, but it's the truth. And so this is part of the LGBTQ agenda in terms of, gender transitioning, and this space, if you will, that is bringing these massive changes to destabilize the family.
Grant, you're doing such an excellent job of explaining everything in a very cohesive manner. I just love listening to you. I'm positive my audience feels the same way. What I now want to transition to is understanding the impact you've been able to make among the Canadians. And are you really influencing the upcoming elections? And do you even have elections, or are they selections
Yeah.
like we've seen here in the United States? I'll stop here and pick up from this point next week. You know, Grant is so thorough and articulate, there was no need for me to interview him or ask any questions for clarity. Because of that, I wanted you to hear as much as you can, completely uninterrupted, and you'll hear the rest from him next week. Grant spoke of Agenda 2030, which I've covered before. You'll find a link in the show notes where you can see it for yourself. Grant also spoke of his book, which I have also provided a link for, through my Amazon, my U.S. Amazon affiliate link. It's highly curious that Grant's book is available through the United States Amazon, but not Canada's. The Canadian site indicates the book is out of stock with no additional date of availability known. I think this is more evidence of the serious censorship in Canada. So view the Amazon U.S. link for Grant's book. You can also learn what the United Party of Canada needs. The website is also in the show notes. From that page, you'll see different ways you can connect, including all the major social media platforms. I also suggest you watch and listen to Grant's press conference held in Ottawa, Canada, where you will hear his heart for the nation and the people. Grant wrote, quote, "If the Liberals can deconstruct Canada with a minority government, imagine what the populists, the social conservatives, and the Christian right can do to reshape the political landscape by presenting a united voice that champions the core values that built this nation and neutralizes the darkness that is undermining Canadian families, our communities, and our national sovereignty." End quote. As I shared last week, the same way we in America have had to fight against tyrannical proponents of a one-world government, so are the people in Canada and many other places in the world. We have to see this is not about earthly governments and politics. It's an ancient spiritual battle about good and evil, and right and wrong, and freedom and enslavement. As I think we can all sense, we are on the verge of experiencing God's undeniable intervention. Again, I encourage you to watch the prophetic video God inspired through Dr. Patricia Green. You'll find the link in the show notes. As I said, next week I'll bring you part 2 of my visit with Grant Abraham. In the meantime, share this podcast with everyone you can, especially citizens of Canada and those who have connections with them. Even if we are not citizens of Canada, as temporary citizens of the world with our true citizenship in God's kingdom, we must, each one, do all we can to combat evil and promote God's righteousness. Now, I ask you to listen to my closing announcements and to take advantage of the many goods and services I bring you in an effort to at least cover the costs of this podcast. The first announcement clarifies more about the changes to our Greece tour, now scheduled for April 2026. I really want you to be able to join us, so please listen carefully and send me the email to save your place. It may seem far off, but most people make plans for a significant vacation about a year in advance. So if you haven't already expressed interest in traveling with us in April 2026, now is the time to do so. We want to have about 30 people total because this size group works best for the specific tour I have in mind. We'll be walking the footsteps of the Apostle Paul. I'm using the time between now and October 2025 to determine if we have enough interest, and the trend indicates we definitely should. We have just about 30 people on the list now, but I'd like to have more because when it comes to the actual day of making a commitment, things could have changed, and I want to be able to have at least 30 actually attend the tour. So if you think you'd like to be part of the Faith to Live By Christian tour with me in Greece during April 2026, now's the time to get your name and number in your party on the list. There's no obligation at this point. You're just expressing your interest. Attendees need to arrange their own air travel to and from the Athens International Airport. To get your name on the list, send an email to faithtoliveby@PamelaChristianMinistries.com with the word Greece in the subject line. In the body of the email, provide your name, contact information, and number of people you expect to be in your party. This will place your name on the interested in attending list, but does not obligate you in any way. It merely assures you have first right of refusal when down payments are due. If you didn't get the details written down that I just shared, simply visit my Beyond the Podcast page using the link in the show notes. If you like what you hear from me with this podcast, I highly recommend my book series, my award-winning blog, and consider signing up for my certificate course in apologetics. My aim with that course is to help people learn how not only to use apologetics to share truth with others, but to help Christian leaders incorporate apologetics into their respective ministries so more Christians are learning how to share their faith. You can learn more by using the link in the show notes. For now, I offer my weekly podcasts, my blog, and bi-monthly e-newsletter at no cost. And certainly I have hard costs associated with doing all I do. If you've been blessed by my work and would like to help my work reach others, why not consider partnering with me? For as little as $10 a month, you can become a partner. Then together we can reach even more people for Jesus. Simply visit my Pamela Christian Ministries homepage and then click on the Give button at the top menu bar. Or if you prefer, you can go directly to the Give page using the link in the show notes. To become a partner, you can use my PayPal or Venmo account, but you will also see other ways you can support my work on that page. Whether you choose to become a monthly partner, give a one-time donation, purchase my books and products from my web store, or support my affiliate sponsors, anything you can do to help me continue this work would be greatly appreciated. And as always, your prayers and telling others about me and my ministry work is much needed. When it comes to my selection of affiliate sponsors, I first look for Christian-owned and operated businesses, and I make a point of personally using the products or services so I can fully endorse them. I seek sponsors that offer products or services you can get via the internet worldwide, and I specifically consider what is common to most people universally. So you'll find health, beauty, and wellness products through Dr. Zelenko's Z-Stack supplements and from Operation Tomahawk and from QE Strong. Dr. Zelenko's Z-Stack supplements are truly amazing and are available to my listeners for a 5% discount per purchase or a 10% discount for a monthly subscription using the promo code FTLB. Operation Tomahawk is a membership purchase program with an American-owned and operated company offering personal and household care products that are not made of toxins or genetically modified ingredients. Stop buying national brands from corporations that are part of the deep state cabal. Use the link in the show notes, and from the drop-down menu under How Did You Hear About Us, select Pamela Christian, Faith to Live By. You may have heard my interview with Rob Renee about QE Strong. Discover the benefits of quantum energy to overcome all sorts of ailments. Visit QEstrong.com and use the promo code FTLB at checkout to receive your discount. Then my newest affiliate I'm really excited to bring you is Q Streaming. That's CUE Streaming Television. People with United States addresses can get over 3,000 channels, including live TV with streaming television without a contract. Get all of your local networks and favorite movie and sports and pay-per-view channels for about half of what cable costs. See the video promo link in the show notes to learn more. Affiliate sponsors only provide financial support to me when you purchase what they offer. So before you support Amazon or any other retailer, if I offer what you're looking for, please purchase through me. When it comes to special occasions, birthdays, or Christmas gifts, consider my books, jewelry, CDs, and more from my web store or any of the affiliate goods and services I offer. When you purchase from my web store, be sure to use the promo code TRUTH, TRUTH, to receive a 20% discount. Again, you'll find all the links in the show notes. If you like the content and resource material I bring you with this podcast, you'll find much more by connecting with me through my blog. In fact, my blog has been awarded 2 unsolicited awards for Christian content. And I'm also very active on social media. I can cover much more on social media than I can with this weekly podcast. And if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to my complimentary bi-monthly e-newsletter. I offer encouragement, special offers, and one of my signature recipes with each and every edition. Yep, I'm a foodie and I love to entertain, which is why Faith, Family, Friends, and Food is a bonus segment of my bi-monthly e-newsletter. To receive even more, please be sure to check out my dedicated podcast listeners page, Beyond the Podcast. Here's where we can connect exclusively and you can download complimentary devotionals, resources, and more. On that page, I also ask you to help me learn more about you and what you want by completing the form visible once you scroll down that page. And something that is very easy for you to do and would mean a lot to me is for you to rate, subscribe, or comment on this podcast according to what your preferred listening platform allows. You know how it works. The more likes and subscriptions to this podcast, the more opportunity we have to expand the listening audience. And that means we can reach more people with the gospel message of Jesus while helping people learn how to better apply their Christian faith. I hope you'll join me next week and tell your friends and family to listen right here on Faith to Live By, where we learn how to gain spiritual victory over life's issues. Until next week, I'm Pam Christian, asking you to remember Christ died for us. The least we can do is live for Him.